Hello, how you doing? Get asked this question all the time about structured water, about the nature of water, especially in live streams. And I don't know how much you think you do or do not know me. I'm not interested in anything that's irrational or illogical at all, such that any type of hyperbolic nonsense connected with what is generally called the New Age movement. Not that all of it's bad, but about 98 or plus percent of it is, really extremely fringe. And by fringe, I mean just completely illogical and irrational and plausible. However, a certain percentage of people think when I talk about qualitatively pure water that I'm kind of speaking in that same zone of the New Age movement, whatever you think that is or is not, and that's absolutely not the case. I'd like to talk about some demonstrable facts and some rational facts. It also goes a very, very, very long way to explaining why we think, well, it's city factors, like you take two identical twins and you raise one up in the country, that's drinking out of well water and eating fresh veggies. Well, he's getting sunlight and he's not encountering social norms and societal stresses as the same identical kid in the city is. And, there's a lot of truth to that, but there's a demonstrable, palpable amount of truth that comes from the fact that water and things that are water related, and also too the microwave device that's in most people's kitchens, are connected to that. And I'd like to make some irrefutable, demonstrable statements regarding water, since it is necessary for life to exist. And analogously, of course, I've said many times that water is a dipole antenna for the manifestation of life. It is talked about in the Timaeus, not water specifically, but the third thing which makes the union of two things possible, that being spirit and matter. And that, of course, is water. Now, there's no consciousness in water. Specifically, it's the incommensurable holographic consciousness matrix. I kind of hate to use the word matrix because then it harkens back to Matrix movies, of course. But in other words, the medium whereby which spirit and matter are allowed to be joined. It is 1,000% irrefutable that life is impossible without water. Now, is there consciousness in water? The answer is no. However, without same, there is no life at all. There is no signal inside the radio. And of course, what comes out of the speaker is analogous to life, or the Greek word zoe, but what comes out of the speaker is the interpolation between the antenna and the signal, and of course the radio. The radio analogy is really quite perfect. I used to be a ham radio operator and make some demonstrable statements and a couple really, really simple analogies that will kind of drive things home. You could look this up yourself too. It's called an inverted V, which, an inverted V would be like this, inverted V dipole antenna. You actually raise it up off the ground. You have a quarter wavelength here and a quarter wavelength over here. The totality of both measurements is half wavelength. And of course, you try to set the mid-band for like HF, high frequency bidirectional communication, in other words, transceiving of signals. And you can have the exact same antenna 100% identical, but you have completely different gain, completely different signal reception at the radio if the inverted V dipole antenna, based upon the reflectance of the signal that you mean to either receive and or transmit on, is too high or too low off the ground, the existing charge or lack thereof on the antenna, the lack of grounding of the antenna. Identical antenna, and I've experienced this myself. I put up many inverted V dipole antennas. By the way, the inverted V is also too Pythagorean incommensurable geometry. It's the exact same geometry of the water molecule itself, which is the only perfect incommensurable geometry in the entire universe according to the Pythagoreans. It's the same reason why I've got it tattooed here upside down on the back of my hand. It's in green. This same 108, 36, 36 degree triangle and triplicate makes up the Pythagorean pentagram. There is no other geometry in this universe that actually has, from top to bottom, left to right, front to back, even though it's of course a two-dimensional geometry, absolute perfect incommensurability. And lo and behold, I'm sure it's total coincidence that that same geometry makes up that which makes life possible. You can have the signal, you can have the radio, and of course its charged battery. Yeah, and you can have everything working correctly, but without the antenna. The interlocutor between matter and spirit, of course the radio would be analogous to matter, i.e. flesh and blood, calcium, carbon, so on and so forth. You have the signal, which of course is everywhere. I find it amazing, like nihilists and atomists will talk about the soul in the exact same way, an intelligent, rational person would be talking about a radio signal. It's like, well, where is it? Well, you can't see it, but it's everywhere. We know it's everywhere around me here because I could just dial in this antenna onto the radio and, of course, turn the radio on, and lo and behold, of course, there's nothing that's coming out of this radio that's part of the radio, rather the interpolation of the signal, because we know the signal is not coming out of this radio. The broadcast is, which is the interpolation of the signal. But they'll talk about it in the same way. Like when you talk about the soul, like where is it? You can't show it to me. Is it inside the body? If I take a body apart, I can't find a soul. There is no soul. It's just ridiculous. Sounds like religious nonsense. They will, in their grand, myopic blindness and spiritual ignorance, talk about the soul in the exact same way a person would talk about a signal relational to radio. We know the signal is real, yet they won't deny that because they know it's demonstrable, but it's not objectively demonstrable, but they'll talk about the soul in the same way. But this third thing, which of course makes life possible, water, has of itself a particular geometry, which is perfect Pythagorean incommensurability. I'd like to get to that in just a second here. But you can have the exact same antenna, and I have experience with this in HF rigs like ICOM 706 Mark II-G. It's an HF rig, 2 m 440, a drop-up a dipole antenna, which I also used to make. And depending on how you put it, lack of grounding to the antenna, the feed line coax, whether it was RG58 or RG8, whether it was grounded, harmonic oscillation of the antenna, because you would usually tie up the top, you'd throw a rock or a piece of lead over a tall treetop, and you'd raise up the center portion of the inverted V. And if the winds were blowing, it would cause the inverted V to dance in the wind and actually oscillate. You'd actually tie it off at the bottom without grounding it into the ground on either end of the dipole. Depending on how high you levitated it up off the ground, would also to change the gain. But if when it was usually tied up at the top of the treetop and it was blowing, the actual inverted V would oscillate kind of like this. I'm making a point here. I'm getting there very quickly, if you could bear with me. I could actually see that out the window. I would notice the gain of not only reception but transmission would actually drop out because the inverted V would oscillate. I'm starting to talk about microwave radiation, like your microwave, and the qualitative nature of water. People, in their great ignorance, most people, just like most people think that light is an emission and it travels at a speed, all of that stuff is incorrect. They only think in terms of quantitatively pure water. How many parts per million of particulate are in the water? It is reverse osmosis treated, or it's been treated by the water treatment plant, and there is FDA, Food and Drug Administration, only 2 parts per million. It is pure water. Well, it is quantitatively pure, but it is not qualitatively pure. You can have the exact same inverted V dipole antenna, 100% identical, but I can count on my hand, and I want to bore you with like 10 more variables where the exact same antenna, which would be analogous to quantitatively pure, has different gains, and the fact that the wind is blowing and the tree is oscillating causes the inverted V antenna to oscillate, which you could hear the gain difference. Like if you're listening to an HF broadcast from the other side of the world, depending on the ionospheric skip, look up ionospheric skip, you could hear it fade in and out, and you could look out the window and see the actual dipole antenna do this number. It's actually changing its shape, and it's oscillating. It is analogously, qualitatively impure. The antenna is 100% identical. There's all these variables that will change the qualitative nature of the gain on that antenna, which is the charge, grounding, ground clutter, how far or high or low off the ground it is, the existing charge in the antenna, oscillation due to wind, how good the grounding is or is not. It is true that there is no memory in water. People say, hey, keep talking about, I make countless videos of this fact, and I will not retract it because it is absolutely the case. Consciousness is not in the structures, like is it in the oxygen atom of the water molecule? Is it in the hydrogen atom of the two hydrogen atoms of the water molecule? You see this? This is also to the Pythagorean incommensurable geometry. This is water, whereby which life is impossible. For lack thereof, life is completely impossible. No, there is no consciousness in either the oxygen or the hydrogen. Consciousness is holographic. It is the consubstantiality between matter and spirit. Water, of course, is itself matter. And interestingly enough, why and how only can consciousness manifest is within the water molecule. But it is not in the oxygen. It is not in the hydrogen. There is no signal in the radio, neither is there consciousness in any of the three components of the water molecule. There is no signal in an inverted V. Go look up an inverted V dipole antenna. Any signal in the countless frequencies that will tune in on an HF inverted V dipole antenna, it is not in there. Well, is it in the copper wire? No. Is it in the coax that feeds for reception and transmission in the copper wire? No. Well, you've refuted yourself. You said it's nowhere within the components of the inverted V. It is a harmonic for manifest. That's what any ham radio operator will confirm to you, that that's the case. Given the correct wavelength, and of course you can actually make a specific one for a narrow band of frequency, so you're only transceiving on a narrow band. For HF, you want to make it the sweet zone for X range of frequencies of HF. It is not in any component of the inverted V dipole antenna. Consciousness is not in any part of the three components of the water molecule. Yet without same and a specific geometry, consciousness is impossible. We're not talking about parts per million of particulate that makes up the quantitatively pure or impure water. We can actually explain rationally and logically and retroductively reasons for, I don't want to use the word insanity, but let's say, like I was trying to think. Like I used to have an inverted V, like I bent it too many times, several of the strands were broken, and it was oscillating in the tree. It's like, wow, you know, this antenna is good. I only built it like less than a half a year ago. It's perfectly set. No, it's not. You got some issues with it. All of the, let's just say, mental instability of people today. Now, we can blame a lot of that on, well, we got stresses and work and school and bills and taxes and society stresses and, you know, the world's gone crazy, and all of those, of course, are variables. But what I'm pointing out is that for this dipole antenna, which makes up the entirety of that which makes life possible, that people are nuking their food, and as you may or may not be aware, other than sugars, microwaves work off of oscillating water molecules, bringing them into great discordance. And people are consuming that. I've been guilty of that for more than a few years myself. I mean, I'm not going to lie about that. Quantitatively versus, by the way, here's a little diagram of like inverted V antenna. You can find countless examples of it online. I like to go down some of the lists and just work rationally on discussing that. So there's no memory in any of the three components of water. It is the actual structure itself. I call this the incommensurable holographic consciousness made possible by water. And I know superficially that sounds like New Age hokum, of which I have no connection thereof at all. But it's rational, it's logical, it explains a lot, and without water, life is not possible. This explains a lot of the mental issues and countless, I don't want to use the word insanity, that humanity is experiencing more and more and more and more. There's countless factors that actually contribute to that, but this demonstrably has to be one of them. Ancient people did not drink unstructured water. They got it through their fruits, their veggies. They got it naturally. Now, let's talk about how nature structures water. There are many examples that you can list that I've probably forgotten to name here. I'm just going to name a few. Rain, waterfalls, springs, dehydration, you know, raises up into the clouds, falls back again. It's in the aquifer system. It's actually qualitatively purified in the little waterfalls and eddies. And of course, people talk about, you know, in ancient days they would drink beer and mead. It's because, of course, of the quantitatively impure nature of bacteria and whatnot that's actually in the water. And we know that because you die in dysentery and countless other things. And people really have only ever thought in terms of that, especially today. They just think, well, how many parts per million is it? Is it free of cryptosporidia, bacteria, so on and so forth? And I do get that, but we're not talking about parts per million of the the quantitative nature of the water. We're talking about the qualitative nature of the water. So microwave ovens, for example, not really an oven, you know, agitates the water. Magnetic polarity and polar structure for osmotic uptake actually increase in the structure of the water. There's a reason why different polarity exposure to osmotic uptake of the water on sprouting seeds and plant growth, you know, all of which, as I recall, involve water. We have a polar molecule, water is a polar molecule, and we actually have a polarized field, i.e. a magnetic field. You get drastically, I've had thousands of people duplicate this experiment. When I started talking about this years ago, some of the experiments with Rawls and Davis, I said, this stuff is real. Don't take my word for it, do it yourself. Thousands and thousands of people have done it. You're like, you're right, I didn't believe you, but I knew you weren't selling anything. I did it, and it did work. Why didn't I learn about this in school? This is amazing. This is incredible. That's a matter, of course, for countless videos that I've already made. Given that water is, of course, the basis of life and consciousness, wouldn't ignorant human beings realize that quantitatively pure water is only, actually it's less than half the story? Far less than half. Structured water, of course, is a stable water molecule. Lack of molecular vibration. Also, too, as consciousness is a network, but consciousness is the holographic, incommensurable geometry of the water molecule. Doesn't a network require interconnectivity? So, well, it's quantitatively pure water, so you got pure water in a person's system. You don't have bacteria and, you know, toxins and heavy metals in there that's causing a lack of communication in the consciousness network of a human being. What else would affect it if it wasn't heavy metal poisoning or countless, you know, bacteria, countless other things that actually can be physical and molecular impurities in the system that would account for, you know, mental, let's just call it mental instability in current modern day humanity. Structural contamination. Let's make another analogy, okay? You got two giant piles of bricks. They're brand new bricks, right? You're going to build two houses with it, right? You got a professional bricklayer here, right? Using the exact same pile of super clean brand new bricks. And over here you got Joe Schmuck, right? You're both got the plans for building a small little house. Yeah. Clean bricks. So the bricks are quantitatively clean. Structural instability. Let's think of the countless millions of ways, not that are directly related to the quantitative impurity of the actual structure, but the qualitative impurity of it, such that there is a miscommunication of the network that, of course, requires water for consciousness to exist. So you got one house made by the novice bricklayer, Joe Schmuck, over here, and you have a professional bricklayer over here. This one is structured correctly. This uses the exact same quantitatively pure identical bricks as the professional bricklayer made over here, but it's not laid right. You know, there's actually an incredible skill to professional bricklaying. I'm sure every one of you know that. Disharmony of the system. It won't stand up to stresses like wind and rain and storms. Two identical. They're both using the same mortar, the same bricks. This house by the professional bricklayer has a structural harmony. This one will stand up. So you have a perfect ratio and a harmony of the system in totality. I'm not talking about the quantitative nature of either one of these things. Did that analogy kind of come through? This one over here won't even take a heavy windstorm. It starts to fall apart. It wasn't built correctly because the person didn't structure it correctly. People say, what are you talking about structured water? I only thought there was pure water and dirty water. Dirty water has got like mud and dirt and bacteria and cooties and all sorts of garbage in it. I could take this antenna. Yeah. I've not changed anything about its quantitative purity. There's actually two pieces of copper that run up through this. One for 2 meter, 1 for 440. I don't want to do it and break the antenna, but I can actually sit here and just bend it so slightly. Actually, bend it back and forth a few times. Before it snaps, it's still all connected. Not break it, but actually cause a weakness in the system. And I will get the actual, if you transmit at full power on this, which I think is 6 watts max output, it'll actually start to heat up. I haven't broken any of the copper, but I've actually caused a qualitative disharmony in the structure of this antenna so that it receives bad and it transmits bad. It's still quantitatively pure, quantitatively identical. People say, I don't believe in qualitatively purity of water. It doesn't make any sense. It only makes sense. It's hyper-rational. It's hyperlogical. I've given you several worldly analogs to say. So it's intermolecular communication of the water molecules, the disharmony thereof, mental instability, and all sorts of unpleasant, undesirable mental phenomena. Microwaved food. Can you imagine all the filth that gets poured down your drain and your toilet? Drano, every pharmaceutical known to man, every form of filth and filth on top of filth, like filth to the power of 1 billion. Well, it's purified at the water treatment plant. Quantitatively, it is. Actually, it's not quantitatively pure because a lot of the super submicron particulate, like birth pill, antidepressants, there's all sorts of stuff that actually makes its way because it's really, really, really small particulate. That's a matter, of course, for another discussion. That actually is quantitative impurity. This specific geometry, as the Pythagoreans accurately said, it's the reason why I tattooed it on the back of my right hand here, says the only perfect geometry in the entire universe, the 115 geometry with the base cut of 1 over phi, the only, not my opinion, a fact, the only perfect geometry also happens to be the geometry for the manifestation of consciousness, and I'm pretty sure harmony, genuine harmony, rather than disharmony. Like not using microwaved water where the water molecule is, I forget, there's been tests done on this. How long after water is microwaved does it continue to violently vibrate? That gets taken up by your cells. The same network interconnectivity issues of unstructured water that comes out of your tap, which is 1 trillion times recycled toilet water with Drano in it, and every pharmaceutical known to humanity, and some things we probably think didn't even exist. And also, too, all the chemicals used to treat it. What do you think that actually does to the structure of the water? I only believe in quantitatively pure water. I've given you the example of the inverted V dipole antenna. It's absolutely identical, but you've got, I named off like a dozen different variables that will change its gain, how well it receives, how well it transmits. That's the exact same antenna. Yeah, but there's all these interesting variables. That goes to the structure of the logos, so the proportionality whereby which the signal is both received and transmitted, both, transception thereof. That transception, analogously in human being, is consciousness. Water is the dipole antenna for life. And that means it is the absolute paramount most important thing regarding life itself. And that's not my opinion, a feeling, or belief. It's a hardcore fact. And that is not New Age hokum or crazy talk, because I have nothing to do with that stuff. I have no interest in it either. Hope you liked this video. I tried to keep it condensed. Thank you so very much for watching. If I sound really, really tired, I am. I didn't go to bed till 6 a.m. last night, same before that. That actually causes a disharmony in the water in the body. Exhaustion, when you actually sleep, Your not only body resets itself, there's, I forget the name of it, there's been studies done on this, it actually changes the nature of the water in your body such that you're able to be recharged. Your water in your body, which makes up most of your body, also too needs to be recharged. That's another fact I forgot to mention. I could go on and on and on about this. It's actually a wonderful topic that nobody's talking about. Thank you.